5 p.m. and we're going to call this work session to order. This is a special meeting of the Kent School District Board, which is held in public to comply with the Open Public Meetings Act. The purpose of this special meeting is a 2-hour budget work session. We thank those of you who have come to this meeting and those who are viewing via our live stream. The purpose of board meetings is for the board to conduct its business in public. The public comments are not included on this special meeting agenda. Individuals with items for the board or superintendent must provide the items directly to safety services staff approaching the dais or the board during the approaching the board at the dais or work session tables during the board meeting is not allowed. Any items turned in will be provided to the board and the superintendent following the meeting. We will start this meeting with a roll call for attendance. Please indicate your presence by saying present when your name is called. Director Cook?
Present.
Director Williams?
Present.
Director Song is absent. Vice President Gregory?
Present.
And I am present. So we will start off. Let me invite Superintendent Vela to kick us off.
Thank you, President Margill, members of the board. Bring us back in time to January 7th. I know this seems like a long time ago. It wasn't that long ago when we were here for a board retreat, which had a bit of budget in it, and we said we'd come back on the 4th. Well, we're here, and we're excited to come with you again on our next budget iteration in terms of where we're going. As you know, we've had several budget presentations, community group meetings, et cetera, and tonight I'm going to encourage the board to think about a couple things as you hear what Mr. Parangwa has for you today. The first is to encourage you to really take a deep look at and focus on the details behind what you'll see in terms of our budget gap. I also encourage you to think about, as you're looking at those details, is pay close attention to the assumptions that also we have forecasted, because those are important in us understanding collectively as a board superintendent governance team, what we need to be thinking about as we move forward in working with our constituents in our community. Again, as many of you have said before, and President Margill, you've said, on behalf of students, this is all about our students. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it right over to Mr. Parangwa and his team.
President Margill, member of the board, Superintendent Vela, Ms. Curry, good evening. We have quite a more detailed presentation tonight, not typical to our previous conversations. Later tonight, we're going to be joined by our Director of Budget, Ms. Lisa Tyler. She's a little bit late just because of some of the personal commitment that she had, but she'll be here joining us some point tonight. So like the superintendent mentioned, that we're going to be showing you a little bit more detail in the budget and the budget process development. And we're going to start with the budget basics. And so in Kent School District and many other districts in the state, we operate about 5 different funds. And they are listed here on the slide. For the purpose of tonight's presentation, we're going to be focusing mainly on the general fund, which is Fund 10. And so in Fund 10, or General Fund, there are several elements that we need to really pay close attention to in order for us to be able to determine what the revenues, expenditures, and the ending fund balance. And so these are the elements of the budget: revenue, expenditures, and then we determine what the surplus or the deficit. We have beginning fund balance, which is typically almost similar to, in our home budget, a savings account. And depending on the surplus or deficit, we determine what the ending fund balance, which is the ending balance on our savings. From that savings account, we set aside designations, which are legally required. And then from there, we determine what the unassigned ending fund balance in dollars and also in percent. And we are required to maintain a minimum of 5% prior year expenditure according to our board policy 6022. So as we go through the presentation, we're going to take each one of those elements of the budget, and when we go a little bit more detail in each one of them. And so it starts with enrollment projection. That is how the process starts. We had to do the enrollment projection. And to do that, the first step is to determine what the birth rate is. And so here we are providing you information on the historical birth rate all the way to 2023. And as you could see right here, from 2016, our birth rate in King County has dropped by about 13.8%. And then the next slide that we're looking at is how many children shows up into our district 5 years later. And you can see right here that they're also declining, but not as sharp as the one from the King County birth rate. And you can see here from 21-22, our enrollment, kinder enrollment, has dropped by about 8.3% since. Once we determine the number of kindergarten, or the projected kindergarten in the district, we now look into the students who are currently in the district, and we analyze how many of them stays in the district. And that's what we call retention rate or cohort survival rate. And if you would look at it from kinder, depending on how many kinder we have to first grade, we generally retain about 100.4% of them. You could go on grade by grade and you would see that that's pretty stable. We're close to about 100, 99.9 to 100, but when we get to the 10th to 11th grade, it dropped to 86.4%. And that is because that is the grade when children starts to enroll in Running Start. And then from that level, we maintain 93.1% from 11 to 12. And this is based on a 3-year weighted average calculation. We calculated them based on a 3, a 5 weighted average and simple average, and we get almost a very identical result depending on each one of those calculations. In addition to that, we also look at the program enrollments such as special education, multilingual education, LAP eligible, and we're gonna talk about that in the succeeding slides. CTE, Running Start, and iGrad. And as a result of that, this is the enrollment projection that you have seen before, but those were the elements of the enrollment projection that we used to arrive at this. And you could see right here that the enrollment from 25-26 to 28-29 continued to decline using those methodologies and also driven by the birth rate 5 years ago. So now that we know the enrollment, the next step is to determine how does the enrollment gets converted into a general fund revenue. And so there are several elements of the general fund revenue. We have the local taxes, which is EP&O levy. And as we know, those are local property taxes that is approved by the voters. There's local support non-tax, there's state general purpose, state special purpose. And we also have federal general purpose, federal special purpose, and we're going to go each one of them in the succeeding slide. We also get transportation money coming from other districts and from other entities. And then other financing sources, there are expenditure that are capital project expenditures that cannot be charged directly into the capital projects, and therefore we spend them in the general fund, and then in turn, we receive money from the capital projects as a reimbursement for that. That's why you see those inter-fund transfer coming into the general fund. So now that we know all the elements of the general fund revenue, this is the slice of the pie for each one of them. And the biggest one is the state general purpose. We get about 55% of our revenue coming from state general purpose. And by the way, those are the ones that are mainly driven by enrollment. We also get 22% of the state special purpose, and then federal special purpose is about 6%, while the EP&O levy is about 15% of the district's revenue. So how do we calculate the state general purpose? And by the way, for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to be focusing on the state general purpose, state special purpose, and federal special purpose, the larger slice of the pie. So how do we calculate the state general purpose? We start with enrollment projection, as we discussed previously. Then those enrollment numbers gets converted into staff units. And those, by the way, to determine the staff unit, OSPI prescribed a ratio. And they said for every X number of students, this is how you would calculate the number of principal allocation, classroom teachers, teacher librarians, guidance counselor, and all the way to the family involvement coordinators. The ratio is applied based on the enrollment, and the number of staff unit is determined for each of those categories. In addition to that, we also determine the district-wide support staff unit. And again, the OSPI prescribed the ratio to be used to determine the staff unit for district-wide support. Once those are calculated on step 5, each category is classified into CIS, CAS, and CLS. And the reason is because the state provides funding according to those 3 categories. And step 6, you will see that for every CIS unit, we get 80,164. For every CAS unit, we got 118,994. And for every CLS unit, we get 57,507. And in addition to that, we got regionalization rate of 18%. That 18% is a representation of the cost of living in Kent. If you were to go into another district in the state, a more rural area, you would find that that number is lower. Now, whether this number is the appropriate rate or not, that is yet to be determined. And I feel like this one is not enough. 18% doesn't really represent the cost of living here in Kent. And the next step, in step 7, is the calculation. How does the calculation work? So now that we know all the staff unit, FTE, we multiply it by the rate, and we'll multiply this by 1.18. That determines what the total salary is. Then the state also provides us health benefits. It's $15,684 for all certificated staff, but they gave us a factor of 1.02. And the reason is because they're recognizing some of the part-time employees. That's why it's 1.02. You will notice that in classified unit, they give us a higher factor, which is 1.43 factor, and that is because there are more part-time employees in our classified unit. That's why they gave us a little bit more. The next one is the payroll taxes and benefits. Notice here that the state is funding us for retirement. The state is also funding us OASDI and Medicare, which, by the way, those are the Social Security. But you will notice that there is no funding for workers' compensation. There's no funding for paid family medical leave. There's no funding for unemployment. Those are essential payroll taxes that the district pays, but the state does not provide any funding for it. The state also funds professional learning days, substitute teachers, running start, dropout re-engagement, ALE, and then we get MSOP, which is, those are the rates that are listed. And there is an additional MSOP funding for grades 9 to 12. And then we have the CTE funding based on the CTE enrollment. Combine all of those numbers, after that is calculated, the state now determines that we need to set aside funding for our special education as a subset of that total. And the reason is because all our special ed children are also general ed first. And therefore, the state is recognizing that you need to set aside some of your money, some of your general apportionment to special ed program. And just for your information, that amount is approximately 9 to 10 million each year. That is a set aside from the general apportionment. Now that we know the elements of the state general purpose, these are now the numbers, the dollar amounts, providing history from 2021 to 24-25. And so each of the category that we talked about shows the number here and also the change, the 5-year average annual change. So as an example, If you look at the total salaries, you will see that it is increasing by approximately 2.7% year after year on the total salaries. Payroll taxes is about 0.4 increase every year, while substitute is declining by about 1.5% every year, the funding for substitute. And so if you look at the overall funding here, it shows that the total state general purpose is increasing at a rate of about 2.8% every year. It's really important to know that number because when we look at the expenditure, you would see that the increases in expenditures are significantly more than the increases in revenues. Here we show also the amount of set aside for our special education program. Now that we've learned about the state general purpose, now let's move into the state special purpose. And so there are different elements of that. That is special education, learning assistance program or LAP, and then we have the transitional bilingual program, which is commonly known as TBIP or MLE. To calculate the special education, we determine the enrollment for age 3 to pre-K, and it's multiplied by $11,606.22 times 1.2 factor. And so that is, again, prescribed by the state. Then we determine the enrollment for grades K to 22, which, by the way, is about 14.43% of our total student population in the district, and multiply it by $11,606.22. We also get funding for state safety net. We get funding for home and hospital allotment. Combine all of that, that provides the special education state special purpose. In LAP, we calculate what the prior year enrollment times the prior year poverty rate. So LAP is based on prior year. There's always behind by 1 year. Then we convert them into staff units, again determined by OSPI. And by the way, those are for certificated staff only, not administrator, for CIS only. And then we multiply that by the rate, and 1.18, we get funding for health benefits under LAP, payroll taxes, and professional learning days. For TBIP, it's roughly the same, with the exception that for TBIP, they also fund us for the staff units for exited students. So the enrollment population of multilingual education plus the student for the staff units for the exited student. And then again, the calculation is the same. We multiply it by the rate. We add 1.18 for the regionalization. We get health benefits, payroll taxes, and professional learning days. What you will notice here is that the state does not factor in MSOC. They do not provide funding for MSOC for special ed, LAP, and TBIP. However, the guidance, the program guideline does not preclude us from using any of these funds for MSOC in this respective program. This is a mechanism to calculate the funding, but they do not restrict us from using this for supplies or contracts or computers and things like that that are needed to run the program. Just want to be able to point out that MSOC only comes in from the general purpose, not in the special purpose. When we look at other programs within the state special purpose, like highly capable, transportation and nutrition services, for highly capable, it's not enrollment, but it's 5% of our K-12 enrollment. That is the basis of the calculation. Again, converted into staff units for CIS only. And then we got the health benefits, payroll taxes, and professional learning days. For transportation, we don't even get to calculate the transportation. The state calculates them for us, and they send us the money. And we have no way of controlling how to increase or decrease the transportation funding. We just have to maintain records and submit them to the state. For nutrition services, as you know that we are currently under CEP, or Community Eligibility Provision, which means all students could eat for free. While all the students could eat for free, we also need to find the eligibility. The students and the parents still need to fill out the application so that we could determine what the eligibility, because that is something that could also affect some of the funding, as you have noticed in LAP, is based on the poverty rate. And if we don't have those applications, then they freeze our account, our numbers, and we don't get the benefit of any increases in the poverty rate. And so it is really important that while every student could eat for free, we encourage every parent to still fill out the application via, there's an online or income verification or direct certification. But how does the funding gets calculated? So for the state special purpose, we count the lunch participation, meaning only those that have been served a lunch participation of students who are not eligible for free and reduced price meals. And they get reimbursed at $4.16 by the state. And then an additional amount gets reimbursed to us by the federal government, which is about 46 cents. So if you combine the two of them, every lunch that we serve, we get $4.62, $4.16 from the state, $0.46 from the federal government. Again, for those that are not eligible for free and reduced lunch. And so now that we know the elements of that, these are now the numbers for each of those categories. And you would see right here that special education has been increasing by about 10.7% every year for the last 5 years. And if you would look at the nutrition services, you'll see that they have been increasing at a pretty rapid rate of about 125%. And part of that was because when you look at 23-24 and 24-25, those were the years when we became CEP. CEP funding is coming from the state. When we get out of CEP, the state does not fund anything anymore. It's all federal. And that is the reason why this is under the state special purpose category. So it's important to note that because previously we were not on CEP. That's why you see that the revenue was only 100,000, 200,000, but then all of a sudden it became 2.5 million and then 4.3 million because of the CEP status. I think that's important to note because as we listen to the budget proposal from the governor, we need to find out, are we continuing with the CEP or not? Because otherwise, then we will be back under the federal funding. As of yesterday, I confirmed that we will be under CEP for up until 27-28, which is a good thing. But as you all know, that things may change. So now that we have talked about the state general purpose, state special purpose, let's talk about federal special purpose. Again, you see special education again. So special education is funded by the state and also funded by the federal. In this case, we don't have any control in terms of how we get the funding. We submit the application in July, and then we get granted right around September. But typically, when we don't hear anything from the federal government, we budget flat in the succeeding years. The same way for Title I, II, III, and IV, you notice that they are by application, and we get the response in September. What's the difference here is that Title I, II, and III, and IV, we've been getting all sorts of information from October onwards, and at some point we heard that Title I is going to be 76% funded, and II, III, and IV would be zero. Well, since then we have heard that Title I is going to be fully funded, II, III, and IV would be 80% funded. Well, the good news is today we heard that the president signed the bill, and now the word on the street is that we're going to be funded 100% on all of them, right? So you could imagine that every time we hear something like this, we have to change our...
Just to clarify, though, wasn't that funding just through August 31st of this year? So it doesn't even go into the 26-27 budget, right?
So the way the federal budgets, they call them forward funding. What they are approving right now funds us all the way to 26-27. So the budget, the 26 budget that they approve now is actually for 26-27. They call them forward funding. And like in 25-26, we're operating on a 24-25 budget from the federal government.
Okay.
And so,
thank you.
Yeah. So So that is the word on the street. We don't have any confirmation, but we just actually look at the headline and say, this education is safeguarded. Education funding is safeguarded. And I think there were some other comments from other states. I actually went all the way to California, some news articles to say that it's going to be 100% funded. Now, having said that, we're going to continue to try to get some confirmation. Hopefully by tomorrow we will have some more concrete information. And here is nutrition services. Again, this is the federal portion of the nutrition services. Again, CEP. Parents still need to fill out the application. But in this case, to calculate the funding, lunch participation of students who are eligible for free and reduced price meals gets reimbursed by the federal at $4.62 outright. Lunch participation of students who are not eligible for free and reduced price meals gets reimbursed by the federal at 46 cents. And so this is the, you're getting money from the state, you're getting money from the federal, combined together. That's approximately about 11 to 12 million a year for our nutrition services. But in addition to that, we get funding for commodities. And commodities, this provides us food supplies for free, up to $1.2 million. That number fluctuates every year, but generally about $1.2 million. Simply what it is, it's like a voucher. They give us a credit, we order, and they deliver to us. We don't pay for it. However, there are some products where we need to bring in for processing. For example, the cheese come in blocks, and we cannot serve it that way. So therefore, we have to bring it to processing and get it sliced, and we have to pay for the processing and delivery. That is a small amount that we pay, but all in all, we get about $1.2 million in credit. This actually allows us to be able to control the cost of operation in nutrition services. And so now that we know the elements of that, now here are the numbers for the federal special purpose, historical and current. Here of note is the top line where we get about 35 million, 30 million, and 32 million in ESSER funds. Those were during the COVID years. And as you could see here, they are no longer with us, but at some point we were able to garner about 90 million altogether throughout the duration of the pandemic. But here you could see that the special ed portion coming from the federal is increasing by about 2.4% every year. And all the other programs are listed here. It's a little bit difficult to project the increases in the federal program because they are grants. And because they are grants, we are not recognizing any revenue that is not yet spent. And that's the difference between the state and the federal, is that the state funding is entitlement. You get the money, you don't need to prove that you spend them. The federal government, in order for you to earn your revenue, you have to spend them first. And then you file the claim. And so if you have carryover funds, even though those were allocation for this year, if you have unspent money this year, that becomes a revenue for next year, because you need to spend the money first before you can claim. And that's the difference between grants and entitlements. Overall, when you look at this, you would see that the federal special purpose is increasing at about 3.5% every year when I exclude the ESSER funding. Now that we know all about the revenues of the district, of the general fund, let's talk about general fund expenditures. And so in general fund expenditures, there are multiple categories also. We have certificated salaries, classified salaries, employee benefits. And again, on the employee benefits here, we spend money on workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, paid family medical leave that is not funded by the state. We also have materials and supplies, purchase services, travel, meals, and lodging, and capital outlay. By the way, capital outlay, there's a threshold, 5,000 and above per unit. And so if we're buying a set of equipment that has a life more than a year, if it is 5,000 and above per unit, including shipping and handling, that is in a different category. If it is below 5,000, it goes into materials and supplies. And so just to provide that context, because when you see the voucher coming to you and you see a $4,995 included in supplies, this is because of that. It's because that is the requirement from OSPI. So when you look at the slides of the pie, you would see that 82% of our budget are salaries and benefits, 4% are materials and supplies, purchase services 13%, and capital outlay 1%. And so, again, just important to note where the majority of our expenses throughout the year. We also look at the expenditures in a different format. We look at it by object, and we look at it by program. And so here, you would see that by program, we spend about 48% of our expenditures in regular instruction, about 19% for special education, 21 or 22% for vocational instruction, compensatory education, or commonly known as categorical program. Those are the LAP, Title, Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, and any local grants that we get, that is part of the compensatory instruction. That's about 9%. And our district-wide support is about 19%. This next slide right here is a little bit more detail about our staffing in terms of FTE. So you would see here the historical view of how many FTE we have on our payroll year after year, and the percent of each of the bargaining units and employee group in each of the category here. So, but in the succeeding slides, you would see it in a chart format instead of table format. This one is a chart format, and here, just to walk you along in this slide, AFSME became a bargaining unit in 23-24, and since then they have 28 members, 28 FTE, and today 26 FTE. When we look at KOP, which is our clerical staff, we have 222 FTE in 25-26. When we look at AFT, 187 as of today, and CAP, which are paraeducators, are 416 FTE. KEA, 1,873 FTE. KSFSA, which is our nutrition services staff, 59 FTE. By the way, many of them are part-time, and so we have more headcounts. These are in terms of FTE. KPA, which is our principals group, 87. Non-represented employees, which are PropTech. Non-represented administrators, central administration, is about 58. PropTech, non-represented, non-management, 142. Teamsters, our bus drivers, 71. And then overall, when you look at the total staffing, today we have 3,142, coming from 3,046 the year before. In terms of dollars, here is the total salaries and benefits we have. So when you look at the year by year, you see that in 2021, our salaries and benefit was $353.5 million. Today, in 24-25, is $439.6 million. And today, in 25-26, our operating budget is $456.9 million. Well, when you look at the trend and you look at the annual increase of our salaries and benefits, it's averaging about 6.2% every year. So our total salaries and benefits year by year, like a stair step, going about 6.2%. You also see here the percent of salaries and benefits as it relates to the total expenditures. And you would see that in 2021, our share of salaries and benefit was about 86.3%, while in the last year, it's 81.9%, and today it's 81%. When we look at the IPD as it relates to the increases in salaries and benefits, you see all the IPDs, which is we commonly know this as COLA, or cost of living adjustment. 1.6, 2%, 5.5, 3.7. On the average, about 3.3% increase every year. And so here is really important to note right here is our labor costs are growing by 6.2%. Our IPD, or our revenue, is only growing by 3.3% year by year. Again, just to emphasize that the expenditure is outpacing even the growth in revenue year by year. When we look at materials and supplies, and again, these are the elements, purchase services, travel, capital outlay, you would see that they are increasing by about 12.6% every year in materials and supplies. And so now that we know all the elements of that, now we have here is the total revenues each year, the total expenditures each year, and the surplus and deficit. At the beginning, I said we're going to cover every single element of that framework, and now we're here, and now we know what the revenues, what the expenditures, surplus and deficit, what our savings account year by year, and the ending fund balance. And as you could see right here, that almost every other year we're experiencing a deficit, but 24-25 to 25-26 are 2 consecutive years that we have a deficit. And then later on, we're going to look at the forecast. As of 24-25, by the time the books were closed, our ending fund balance was 8.9%. Currently, we are projecting 5.7%. And again, here you could see year by year that the increases in revenues at about 5.3% every year combined versus a 7.2% combined increases in expenditure every year. That by itself shows that the expenditure is outpacing our revenues. We also want to look at the components of ending fund balance. When you see ending fund balance, not all of them are available. There are elements of the ending fund balance that are non-spendable, and those are required by the state for us to set aside. And they are inventory and prepayments. There are some restricted fund balance that we need to set aside if there are unspent categorical funds. There are assigned fund balance, like for example, compensated absences, meaning like for every accumulated absences that we have to put value in it and we have to set aside money for it. After you set aside all of that as what we call designation, what's left is the unassigned fund balance. This is the last 2 lines in this chart. And then so if you would look at 24-25, the year that just ended, our 5% minimum is 25.9 million, and then we have 20 million that is additional unassigned fund balance. In 25-26, you see the 26.8 million, 5% minimum, and a 3.8 additional ending fund balance. So that is the elements of the ending fund balance. The next slide right here shows you in chart format. The green are these are the unassigned, those are the assignment, the designated fund balance, and the blue are the unassigned ending fund balance, which is what we need to maintain at 5% every year. So now that we've covered all the framework, let's. What I'm going to show you next are some of the elements of the budget. In a more, we're going to zoom a little bit more into some of the moving parts of the budget, which is what we call prototypical school funding model, or commonly known as the over formula cost. There are 2 parts to it. One is the state funding rate per FTE versus KSD rate of pay. So when you look at the table, you would see that the state funding rate for CIS, CLS, and CAS. And for CIS, we get 94,594, classified staff, 67,858, and for administrators, 140,413. When you compare that to the average amount of average pay per FTE of our CIS, we pay 110,201. And then for our CLS, we pay 84,134, and for our CAS, we pay 184,659. When you look at the difference of each of those categories, and you add the statutory benefits on it, and then you multiply it by the number of FTE that the state funds for us. Remember the staff units? This is the staff units that the state provide. The underfunding is about $33.7 million on that first category. When you look at the second category of this, is the number of FTE funded by the state versus the actual number of employees that we hire. That's the second part of it. The first part is the rate per FTE. The second part is how many FTE does the state provide and how many FTE do we hire. And so when you look at this, you see that we are funded at 1,682 FTE. We hired 1,846. And so we have 163.5 more FTE staff than what the state provides. And so that is the part that is not funded. And so if you multiply that with the rate of pay, you will see that we are short by about 19.7 million. And when you combine the two of them, it is a total of 53.4 million of over formula. Now, this number is based on a 25-26 number, based on the last payroll in December. And so later on, I'm going to show you how are we funding this. Because if the state is not funding 53.4, how are we surviving every year, right? And so there would be a slide on that the later part of this presentation. So we're going to look at inclusive education. You would see here the revenues and expenditure year by year. And you would see that we were on a deficit from 15.8 million in 2021 all the way to estimated 27 million in 25-26. When we look at MSOC, you would see here that we were underfunded by 7 million in 2021. And then in 24-25, we were at 12.9 million short. In 25-26 is a little higher because we are still in the year. Typically what we do is we budget contingency in the MSOC, and sometimes we need more funds in the salaries and benefits. And when that happens, we actually move the MSOC dollar into salaries and benefits. And that's exactly what happened in 24-25 when we had more need in the salaries and benefits. We had to move some of that money into the salaries. When we look at transportation, we're averaging about $1 million of shortfall every year. When we look at multilingual education, we get about 15 million in funding and we spend about 24, again, short by about 8.8 in this year. When we look at dual language program, we don't get funding, special funding for dual language, but the operation of dual language shows a cost of approximately 6 million every year, and therefore the entire amount is unfunded. When we look at highly capable, we get about 0.9 million every year, and our expenditure is about 2.8 million, and so therefore it's a deficit of about 1.9 every year. And so this next slide right here shows us how are we surviving. If we are spending this much more money than what the state is funding, how are we surviving every year? And so thankfully, we have our community who's supporting Kent School District. And again, our community supported our EP&O levy in the last election. And as a result of that, we were able to bring in 77.1 million in 24-25. And then I think that number is growing every year. And we get about $8 million of other local revenues that we use to be able to cover all the shortfall. And as a result of that, when you look at the total amount of shortfall from the state, it's about 110.8 million, and we were able to cover that 85.1 million coming from the EP&O levy and other local revenues, which is about 76.8%. Now, the EP&O levy, as you're aware, that they are going to be expiring on December 2027. And we will be in the ballot in February 9, 2027. We are counting our community to be able to support it once again. Otherwise, this is a significant, as mentioned, 15% of the district's revenue. when we develop our budget, we make some assumptions. And so these are some of the general fund forecasts. Here we have the enrollment. We also have the IPD, the projected IPD. We have some assumptions for class size, assuming no changes. We have the step and column adjustments, which is commonly missed, is that most of our teachers actually move into the salary scale every year, move a step, and in some cases even move a column because they provide additional credentials and additional education. And therefore, when we run that calculation, it's about 1.25% every year. We also provided you here all the information about our collective bargaining agreement that has reached an agreement. In 26-27, there is one bargaining unit that is open for negotiation, which is our nutrition services. But all the rest of them have reached an agreement, and that the salary adjustment are already identified. And so it makes it easier for us to factor them in when we run the forecast. And since those are now available, you will see that the value of those salary adjustment, the total cost of the increase in salaries and benefits for 26-27 is $16 million based on all these increases that you see here. Some are IPD, some are IPD plus one. When I calculated what that number is for 26-27, it's $16 million. Now, we maintain a calculation of what the cost of 1%. So every bargaining unit, we have the cost of 1%, and that's why when you multiply that by the numbers that are listed here, that's how we arrive at the 16 million. And so this next one right here is the result of all those assumptions that I mentioned. This is now the general fund forecast. One thing of note right here, if you look at the 25-26 revenue, that's 541.2 million. And you compare them into the revenue for projected revenue for 26-27 is 548.1. That is an increase of about 6.9 million from year to year. But when you look at the expenditures, assuming no changes in our assumptions and that we're not changing the class size, we're not making any cuts, that is the assumption, the expenditure will increase by 18.5 million. So think about 6.9 million revenue, 18.5 million in expenditure. Off of the 18.5, 16 million of them are contractual obligation guaranteed because we've already settled the agreement. That leaves us with about 2.5 million of an amount that we could use for inflationary increases for the remainder of the budget. So if we have a 570 million budget or 530 million, depending on the year, 2.5 million is dangerously low as it relates to the inflationary increase, cost of utilities, cost of doing business, materials and supplies. 2.5 million might be short. And so if we don't make any change with this assumption, our fund balance is going to drop to negative 92.1 million, or negative 15.3%. We cannot stay right there. This is violating our board policy. And so therefore, I created another calculation. How much cuts do we need to make to be able to meet the 5%? And so you've seen this chart before. Previously, you see 35 million. And now it has been changed to 30.5 million because we heard from the federal government. Previously, we thought we're going to lose our Title II, 3, and 4. Now we're getting 80% of them. And that's why we had to change our calculation every time we hear some changes from the state and the federal government. In addition to the 30.5 million, we also need to make an additional 9.5 million the year after, and another 9.5 million the year after next. That is on top of each other. It's not the same cut. So 30.5 in 26-27, 9.5 in 27-28, another 9.5 in 28-29. And as you'll notice right here at the bottom, we are able to maintain a minimum of 5%. I'd like to emphasize minimum because that amount, the 30.5, is what's needed to maintain a minimum of 5%. That does not provide us anything for any unanticipated emergency expenditure. And so as we plan for budget cuts, we might be looking for something more than that, just to allow us to be able to build up our fund balance a little bit more so that there would be some amount for unanticipated emergency expenditures. I'll give you an example of some of them. We don't have, in this calculation, we don't have money for deferred maintenance. And if any of our facilities fail, we're going to try to extend the life of those facilities. But there is a point in time where you cannot maintain them anymore. You had to replace. There is no funding here. Now, our bond money is earmarked for a specific purpose. We cannot just simply take that money and use them for building maintenance because we made a promise to our community. And so we have to be careful about using the bond money for some of the facility projects. So those are the example that, one of the examples, and there are many others that I could share, why we think we need to add a little bit more than just the 5%. And so as we try to develop the budget, there are so many balancing details what we have to think about. First, we need to make sure that we're fiscally solvent. We have to look at the fiscal responsibility. We need to make sure that this budget is stable. It's really hard to develop the budget when you are always ups and downs. And it eliminates our focus into children's education by focusing mainly on how to be able to balance the budget. So if we could make this stable, then we could then focus on the things that are more important, which is really educating our children. We need to make this sustainable. We cannot be spending money that we know we cannot sustain. And so those are some of the things that we have in the budget office. That's what we think about. But on the flip side of that, we have all these challenges. We have this inadequate state and federal funding. We have increasing cost of operation, federal and state compliance. We need to adhere to our CBA. We have declining enrollment. We have social and emotional health of students and staff, student access, technology that we need to replace more frequently now, facilities maintenance. So those are the things. But in the forefront of all of that is our students that we keep in mind all the time. How does this affect our children? What is in the best interest of the children? We think about graduation. We think about the children's experience in our school district before they graduate. So you could imagine that the balancing act that we're doing to be able to really build a balanced budget. And so with all that said, these are the engagement that we have done over the last couple of months. As you could see that there were quite a bit of them in January, but we started all our process in October when we discovered that our enrollment actually was down. And we've met with our labor groups, we met with our staff, we had a board update, we had parent advisory, student advisory, and the community chat with the superintendent. And so with all of that, here is the planning that we have, the budget cuts planning, which, by the way, is still in progress, and that's why you see numbers in range. They are not yet finalized. Some of them has been identified, and some others are still in progress. And so when you look at the building support, we're looking at $4 to $4.5 million, and there would be impact to the administrators, clerical staff, and some of the planning sections, because the number of classrooms are dropping, the number of sections will accordingly will drop also. Categorical program, this number will be changed. Depending on what we heard, what we confirmed from the federal government, currently we're estimating 3 to 3.5, but now that we have new information, this number will change in the next version. Central office, we're looking at central office staff. Class size, $11 to $12 million. I wrote down right here that we're going to be using the provision in our collective bargaining agreement, Article 7.2, which is workload. And so that would be the guide that we will be using as we make decision on the class size. MSOC for supplies, about $1 to $2 million. Operations, we're going to be looking at custodial hours. We're going to be looking at overtime. And in some cases, we're going to be also looking at some of the revenue that we generate for facilities rental, because we have not updated those rates for many, many years, and we're still using the old rate, which might be, in some cases, we are, we're collecting less than the actual cost. We're subsidizing some of those, and so we will be reviewing that and come back to you with those rates. And then program adjustments. 7 to 8 million, that includes consolidation of dual language program from Kent Elementary to Neely O'Brien. And then there would be some more details that we're working on in terms of inclusive education. So here are some of the key takeaways. You've seen this before, it's the same. As you could see, that assumptions are changing. We thought it's the number today, tomorrow it changed. And so they're going to be changed again before it gets finalized. Enrollment projection, enrollment decline. As you're aware that when the enrollment declines, you lose revenue faster than you could reduce your expenditures. And the effect is the opposite when the enrollment is increasing. State funding not catching up with the increasing cost of doing business, as you could see in some of the slides here. It's just program after program. Expenditure are outpacing revenues. Federal funds, as of today, still remain at risk, but tomorrow may not be the case, so we'll see. EP&O levy, as I mentioned, will be expiring, and so again, we would like to ask our community to continue to support that in the upcoming election in February 9. Structural deficit. As you could see that it drains our savings. Budget cuts, we need to make budget cuts in the next 3 years to maintain at least 5% minimum. And the next one right here, I want to focus your attention on the second to the last slide here, second to the last bullet. Our general fund burn rate is about 47 million. That's how much we spend every month. A 5% minimum unassigned ending fund balance is about 2.5 weeks of operating costs. This is dangerously low, and here is the reason why. When you look at end of the month, like for example, today, we just paid the payroll in January 31. My hope is that by end of January, entering into February, that we have at least 47 million in the bank, right? And that 47 will allow me to be able to pay all the bills in the month of February. And today I ask how much money we have in the bank. We have 45 million in the bank as of today. Now, I get concerned because 45 is not 47. If I'm short by $100, I cannot run this payroll. This is really important for us to be able to go more than 47. And in some cases, there are months where we spend 50 million. The reason? Because some of the pay are not equal. Some pays are higher in November, because that's when we pay our commitment stipend. So you would see a higher burn rate in that month. In June is higher burn rate. And so they're not all equal, but at least at this juncture, at least 47 or 50 million I should have in the bank at the end of each month. And today I get really worried with 45 million. Now, the state sends us the money on the 28th of the month. They send it every 28th of the month, no fail. But the problem is sometimes there were months where we release our payroll earlier than the 28th. And so therefore we need to make sure that we have enough cash in bank to be able to do that. What if the apportionment gets delayed? So we need to make sure that every end of the month we have this much money. And so for that, I would really, and we brought this to your attention once before. We asked for your consideration to consider increasing this 5% into something that is more manageable. An 8.5% brings a month full of operation. That's close to about 46.5, 47. A 10% will give us about $53 million. And so, preferably 10, but somewhere in between. Now, having said that, it is not easy to build our reserve that quick. And so that's not going to happen overnight. And for your consideration, what we're asking you is to consider maybe set us a goal and start building it. And we could probably even think about how many years to build it. That gives us a guide on how to be able to manage the budget every year, and for us to be able to hit that mark every year. And so, but the goal is to be able to maintain a certain cash balance at the end of each month so that we are secure in actually releasing our expenditures, not just payroll, but also our bills. Now, there is an upcoming bill to require every school district to maintain a 6% minimum and a maximum of 12%. There's no bill number yet, but that is currently at the state. This will increase the minimum fund balance from $28 million to about $33.8 million. And in order for us to be able to get there, we just need to continue to shrink our expenditure year after year and try to maintain that increase in revenue equals increase in expenditure. And as you could see right now, if our revenue is increasing by 6.9 and our expenditure is increasing by 18.5, off of the 18.5, 16 of them are guaranteed labor costs. That is really very difficult to manage. And that's why we're asking you to really consider increasing the minimum fund balance. Here are some of the events or some of the budget or the board meeting budget updates that's going to happen in the next few months. This will actually provide our community some opportunity to participate in this process. During the board meeting, community could come and speak about the budget. Particularly on June 10, that would be the public hearing. And it's open to the public for them to participate. And June 24th would be the budget adoption. With that, that concludes my report. I actually provided you with some extra slide at the very end. It's meant to provide you a little bit more detail about the forecast, what the line-by-line item. I don't mean to cover it right here, but it's for your own reference.
And you were so generous in that font size.
Oh, and by the way, you could see that on the November financials. So,
Sorry. I did want to just take a moment. The board we spent quite a bit of time in our last retreat talking about the principles. And I just wanted to take a moment to make sure that we just said those out loud as we go into this. And I probably should have started today with this. Thank you first. Oh, well, thank you. It's going off my own computer. Well, here we go. Minimize impact on student programs, comply with strategic plan, comply with state and federal mandates, keep schools open, minimize reduction in force, comply with existing school board policy, protect services that eliminate barriers to learning, preserve current operations as much as possible, honor collective bargaining agreements, and avoid short-term fixes in favor of prioritizing long-term fiscal solvency, responsibility, and stability. And just to note, all of these are bulleted, not numbered. We say that they are all important, and we go into them and into this conversation looking at all of them, as we know that many of them are connected and reinforce and stabilize the other ones too. So, Mr. Parangao, thank you very much for all of this very detailed information. I know a lot of your presentation, not only necessary, but also derived from the questions that the board has asked very directly too. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to mix it up a little bit today and start on this end and move this way, but I will, of course, keep myself last.
First, thank you, because this is very detailed, and I appreciate the deliberate way that you went through and explained where all of our funding comes from, because often, I know I was at the legislative day last week, and we're having those conversations, and they're like, blah, 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 and having this detail allows me to then advocate, right? So this detail is very important, and I did have this beforehand, before I went down there, so I feel, I want to talk, I'm gonna hold it to one question. I want to go back to the general fund revenue, the state general purpose, and the steps, that step 1, step 2, step 3. And I want to talk about the ratio. So can you go into a little bit more detail about how, this is slide 12, I think. We know that this is broken, right? This ratio is broken because we can see later on that the numbers don't, we only need 1,200 staff, but we have 1,600. There's some, why is there a disconnect? Can you talk about when this ratio was built and then how it's broken? Like, what is the component of this side of it? So one funding is the kids, and then this funding, I don't think people really understand. So if we can talk just about this ratio.
So that is actually part of the prototypical school funding model. That has been in place for many, many years. I don't know when. Lisa, you might be able to share when it started.
I don't recall that it's changed since I've been in school district budgeting.
It's been a long time. Like clearly law came into play and then we came up with this ratio and we really haven't looked at it in decades.
OSPI
correct?
has recognized that it needs updating, revamping. OSPI are starting the process of upgrading their software systems, so maybe that'll be a part of that. So they're gonna start in 26, 27. The majority of that we probably won't see until 27, 28. But we are gonna start seeing some changes with the products that we use from OSPI. One of them would be, the revenue/staffing model that we use, to build our budgets, hoping would be one of those
Okay.
updates.
Trick-
But
Yeah, so the ratio also gets reviewed. So where the opportunity is for lobbying and advocacy is to change the ratio. I remember, at least in the last 3 years, they have changed some of the ratio on psychologists, nurses, occupational therapists. So there is an opportunity there to advocate for a lower ratio that then generates more staffing units. And that's year by year. I guess this is a perfect opportunity for us to advocate for it, to lobby for it while they are in session. Not only that we could advocate for a higher rate per FTE, but also lower down the ratio that could potentially generate more revenue. So,
Right.
Yeah,
Thank
Director
you.
Gregory, if I can, I appreciate the time in Olympia that we had. As you know, long-term, we're looking for a needs-based model. That's where we need to go. We're talking about a ratio that it's very difficult to continue to help support kids from a needs purpose or based, so.
Right.
But wanted to thank you.
You did an incredible amount of work, and I just really want to commend you. This is extremely detailed. It's very well laid out. When I put together my list of questions, normally they're very, very long. I only had a couple, and most of them you've answered during your presentation today. I do want to ask a question about slide 34, when we get into the over formula costs. One more back. Yeah.
this one,
That's the one.
yes.
So in comparing our CIS, CLS, and CAS salaries, where it's state funding versus KSD average funding, I'm noticing that CIS, we're paying a KSD 116.4% of the state rate. CLS is 124%. And CAS is 131.5%. How does this compare to our neighboring districts? And what is the rationale for us to be paying, I believe we should be paying our staff as much as we can. But what is our rationale here for that average salary?
Yeah, so I don't have any information, although that could be done in some future time, like the comparison between KSD and any other neighboring district. I'm sure probably HR might have done that in the past throughout the labor negotiation. However, in terms of the rationale, many of these rates are collectively bargained. And that's pretty much the outcome. This is outcome of a collective bargaining labor negotiation. So.
Damon, or I was going to add to that as well. Right. Okay. It's been a goal of the school board for the last few years to ensure that our salaries are competitive. And by competitive, it's been stated that the goal is that we remain in the top third of our neighboring districts in all of our bargaining groups, every single bargaining group. Well, we compare ourselves to 5 other districts. So that means we're in the top 2. And we are in the top 2 of all of our neighboring districts when it comes to salaries in all of those areas. Some are 1, some are 2. So that's what drives that. So if you were to lay out our neighboring districts that we use to compare against, you'll see very comparable salaries, plus or minus just a little bit on the administrative side. So even though that's 131%, and then the others are about 116, you'll see that the same thing is the same in Highline or Federal Way or Auburn, Renton. So
So what I'm hearing you say is that the reason we're at between 116 and 131.5% over that state funding is not only to make us competitive with neighboring districts, but to draw talent
that's correct.
so that Kent students are receiving the best education that they can.
That's correct. Recruitment and retention.
Awesome.
Retention, I was going, I think it's
There may
important to-
be also just an additional clarification that the way they are grouping this and the way they're funding this. You notice CIS is clear, the certificated staff, right? When you look at CAS, also easy to determine because those are certificated administrative staff. You wonder, what does CLS, which positions belong to CLS? What you will notice, and those are classified staff, no question, but classified administrators belong to CLS also. Classified administrators. And so that's actually, again, that's the way the state formulate them. And where I see an opportunity here would be, like in addition to what Mr. Berenger mentioned, was also on the rate that is funded by the state. You notice that this is also including 18% regionalization rate, right? And so they gave us the rate for every district in the state, and then they apply a regionalization rate on it to represent the cost of living in your area. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't think 18% is a good representation of the cost of living in Kent. So that is where a possible opportunity is to impact the regionalization rate. Not only that you change the base, but also maybe add more into the regionalization that is more representative of our city.
Thank you, Mr. Perigo. Director Cook.
So I remember us discussing this back in June of last year, and I brought up the fact that we were not planning at all for this year. We didn't make any cuts. We didn't look at anything in that way. We are currently in the same situation as far as how it will impact us if we choose not to do anything, which I've asked multiple times. And I'm just curious why this is such an emergency right now. I know you speak to the fact that we might have an increase in the amount of money that we need to hold in reserve. I understand that idea, but it is in a pocketbook. We have revenue coming in regardless, and the idea that 2.5 weeks, I don't know what that even means. If you go all the way down to a day, yeah, that's going to be a day's worth of money for something, right? It doesn't make any sense to bring it down to that because it's a budget of $500 million. So I don't understand why we're talking in weeks here, because the amount of money that we're talking about, a $50 million budget surplus to keep us afloat, that really isn't enough. And I don't know that we can have enough to be able to be protecting ourselves in a way that actually is meaningful. So for us to be in this crisis situation and to be planning to take on additional pain just because doesn't make any sense to me. Has there ever been a time in KSD where we've had that situation where we've decided that we're going to go up above what the board has agreed to? And on top of that, I don't know of any districts that are planning for this. I talked to many of them when I was at WASDA, as I went to many trainings while I was there on finances. And we all kind of laughed. There's no way that the legislature is going to go in there and suggest that every district in this state is going to increase their budget during a shortfall by additional percent. That is political suicide. None of them are going to do this. So there isn't an imperative on that side. We have a fund balance that we can rely on for the next year, and yet we're still looking at this as an emergency. And please explain to me why we are treating this as an emergency when we have time and we can make these adjustments throughout the next year. And from what I was told last year, 2 years. That's a long time to be able to be solvent. And I'm not saying we spend it all the way down, of course not. But that gives us time. It's just like fifth grade camp. We ended up getting a grant, and we could have probably saved it. But we chose not to because we just ignored it. And it's the same way here, I feel like. We're going to come out next year, and we're going to have tried to fix all these things, and we've just really hurt people going through that. And I just don't see the purpose. So please explain it to me.
So Director Cook, before, there were a number of questions in there.
Yes, sir.
So I believe your first one was weeks. Are you referring to the fund balance
Yes.
and referring to what the first number we heard was 8.5%, I thought, from the state at WASDA? So I want to make sure that my team is answering the right question. So let's take that first. So, Mr. Perringwell.
Actually, before we get, since we all have one question, what was the one, there was many in there. Which one question did you have?
Is this an emergency?
Not today, but as you know, in finance, we always look at today and in the future. And we are already seeing all the signs right now. We're seeing the signs in December because we had an early release in our payroll before the holiday, and we don't get our apportionment until the 28th of the month. We had a little bit of, I'd say maybe a panic right there because I need to release the payroll and we may end up not having enough funds because the money is going to come in on the 28th. So that was a sign. We were able to rectify it, and we were able to change some of the dates on the release of the funds. For example, we had to wait, and in some cases, because we were allowed. Payroll, you can't, but the vendors, we could hold it and say, okay, how about if I pay you in January rather than December? If it allows for it, if it is within the term. So accounting department did all the work that they could do to be able to make sure that there's enough fund balance so that we could release payroll early. So that's a sign. Today is another sign. I asked how much is our cash balance right now? 45 million. The bills that we have to pay, we know is at least 47 million. That's not enough. And if the money don't come on the 28th, what are we going to do? Right? And even the federal government actually threatened us once before that they will actually stop the claiming mechanism. Hopefully that's not the case any longer. And so it is not a crisis right now, but we know it's coming. And anybody who is in my position here would like to inform you that that's the case. Otherwise, if I don't tell you and it's happened and all of a sudden all the employees are not getting their paycheck, we will have a bigger problem. That's why we would like to inform you right now, this is what we are seeing.
And
I
if
just
I
like
may,
one follow-up because of the concern that I have about what you just said. And the concern that I have there is your claim that we would somehow not be paying our staff. Can you point to any example in our state at any point where that has ever happened to any district ever?
Yeah, North Shore had it, Auburn had it,
And
yeah.
where were they? Were they below their fund balance and they started just
so let
stop
me-
paying people?
let me add to Mr. Perringwell's point that he made. We were at the same session at WASDA. And if you recall, those districts that are in 3 potential phases of binding conditions. So to answer your question, and to add to Mr. Perringwell's point, in terms of emergency, what we heard is you don't wait until there is an emergency. What you need to do, and by the way, policy 6001 that the board has, I'm responsible to make sure I share with the board how we're implementing the budget, how we're monitoring expenditures, which is what you heard today, and back to the binding conditions. Yes, as you heard from your fellow board members, the problem that many districts that are in binding conditions trying to come out of it is because they fell below the fund balance. They had to borrow money, and I believe we heard from Ms. Hayes at our retreat, North Shore was one of them. And when you borrow money and you're below, it costs interest. Now you really are putting a district is not looking for long-term financial stability, which is one of the board's principles. So I just wanted to add those pieces to this.
Let's continue on talking about fund balance here for a second. Something that I've brought up for years is bond rating. And I know this has been brought up in the past too. And so my question is on this. We know that our bond, we're going to have to go out for a bond here 28th.
Yes.
And the more that we have in reserves, I'm saying my assumptions on this one and making sure that this is correct. So bond rating determines your ability to be, the price at which we have to borrow money, basically,
Correct.
right? And so the better bond rating we have, the cheaper we can borrow it. So basically,
Correct.
it's kind of like our credit rating.
Yes.
Right? So people with really good credit can borrow a car, cheap rates. People with more colorful credit history might have a little bit more of an interest rate that they have to
Correct.
pay, right? So that's what we'd be borrowing to be able to modernize some of our buildings that we have, things like that, right? If we're going out in 28, when do we have to really start thinking about what that bond rating is and what that fund balance is, because that has such a direct impact to what that bond rating is?
So it's almost immediately after the 28, because the moment we pass the bond, the next step would be to issue the bond. And that is actually when we go out in the market and we ask lenders to lend us money to sell the bonds. And the process of that selling is the credit rating. They're going to reevaluate our credit, and they're going to say, okay, you're a good creditor, and therefore, okay, we're going to give you a preferable rate, or we're going to downgrade, or we're going to upgrade. So almost immediately after the bond, the passage of the bond, issuance is next, and that is when it's needed. But to your point about what are the elements that the credit rating like S&P and Moody would be looking at? The first thing is they already saw our projections here. Every time we submit our F-195F to the state, they look at that and they see that even in the past years, we've been showing that we have a deficit. The first thing that they look at is what is your ability to reduce your expenditures? And so that's how they're going to measure the financial management of the board and the district is how are you able to reduce your expenditures in times where you are running deficit? The second is how much reserve do you have? How much ending fund balance? And at 5%, they're going to measure exactly the way we're measuring it. How many weeks of operation is your fund balance? And then thirdly is how are you able to maintain it? What is your relationship with your labor? So they look at all of those. And again, that's why I think one of the slides that I show is we need to maintain this stability, because if Moody's or S&P, they see that our fund balance is like this all the time, they now become suspicious and they want to make sure that our operation is stable. And so those are the things that they are looking at to give you a preferable credit rating.
Do we not have to have an estimate of what the cost will be of the bonds before we go out for the bond, though?
Yeah, so there will be, first of all, I think before we go out, we had to, hopefully we could actually get some polling company who would do that and find out what the rates will be.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were to look at the facilities needs assessment, what are the needs, I'm sure we're going to come up with billions in this district. Now, granted that there may not be enough tolerance from our voters to give us $1 billion or $2 billion, we need to find what that spot is where we could actually get the approval from the voters. And then at that point, recognizing that if you give us $800 million on a $2 billion needs, we're only going to be able to perform a partial of the project, right? And so that is where the prioritization will come. But when you get let's just say, for example, an $800 million passes at the bond, you cannot really implement $800 million worth of project because you have to think about the time element of them. There is escalation that you have to look at. Labor cost goes up, like we see it right here. Material goes up, supply chain issue. And in some cases, you have to build in about 15% contingency in your project to be able to allow for those unanticipated costs. And so the 800 million becomes a 600 million project by the time you finish all your projects. So I just want to be able to share that because the needs are great. The voter tolerance may not be aligned to the needs.
And I would encourage the board, I think that we need to see some options of what it looks like for increasing our fund balance beyond the 5% on page 44. What would that projection need to look like if we want to be above that 5%? That closer to that 8.5%?
From an accounting standpoint, it's not enough money. I mean, it's paycheck to paycheck. A 5% ending fund balance is paycheck to paycheck. We are risking your paycheck to paycheck. We're gonna have to go get a payday loan to make payroll or pay whatever it is. And I come from the corporate world, and it's very famous. Bill Gates would call every day, and he would want the head count number and how much money was in the bank. And then he would take Post-it notes, and he'd run around with them all day long, and he would calculate if he could pay people for 6 months if they didn't sell any products. And he would only hire enough people so that money he could pay everybody for 6 months. That was his plan. Like, that was always his plan. And so I come from that mindset, and sometimes it comes into my own world because I grew up in that corporation. I come from that mindset of, do we have enough money to pay for our expenses? But mostly I'm concerned about payroll. And our medical pay and like all the taxes and all that stuff. That's what I concern myself about. I agree with Raul's point. He said, though, we need a plan for over 5 years. I don't think,
Agreed.
I don't
That's what I'm
think,
stating. It's
Yeah.
like, can we see what that plan is?
yeah, I don't think you can do it in a year. I think we need to look at how do we grow it slowly? And if the state, because we talked about it last week, if they give us another mandate with no funding, we got to push back and say you can't mandate a 6%. No school, every school would then go under it by time. No school could make it. No, if they passed a law like that, there is no school right now, maybe one or two in the whole state, that would be able to adhere to that. Because they're running at that 5%. They're running, that's where they're running. That's why they want to increase it, so we don't have risk.
Yeah, I think, Director Gregory, I want to go back to Director Cook's point about when we first heard that at WASDA, we definitely heard there were districts there with their board members that were like, you got to be kidding me. Having sat with several districts, they were in different places in that spectrum I mentioned in the 3 different binding condition areas. So some were already coming out, trying to get out of binding. Some were trying to figure out how to keep out of it. And others were, but I think to Director Cook's point, they could not believe that the state would do something like that. And that bill, as Mr. Paragon mentioned, it's still out there in that conversation state. That does not mean that our board can't do what President Margell mentioned, and does not mean that our board can't work collectively to put a plan in place. And so regardless of what that is, but I just wanted to share that in that Director Cook made a good point on what we heard that day.
Yeah.
So,
Can I ask just a question on what happens, right? Okay, so let's say that we're heading in the direction that we're concerned about, we're worried about paying our staff. What is the trajectory? How long would that take? How many different steps are there before we get there? How many supports do we have from the state, county, city, our own funds here? Basically, what would it take for us to get to that point? And how long before we get there?
Let me clarify the question. How long would it take for us to put a plan in place to increase the fund
No,
balance?
no, how long would it take before we aren't able to pay our staff? Because that's the concern that I keep hearing from my board.
We're
And-
obligated to pay our staff, so.
Well, I understand, but that's the argument, is that we want to pay our staff, which I agree. So I want to know, how long would it take for us to get to that point? Because if we're going to be talking about it.
You borrow funds. You pay your staff, but you
Yes, but
borrow
there's a
funds.
timeline, there's a dollar amount. All of those things are important, and the support that we have is important. So I want to know, how long will it take for us to get to the point where we don't pay staff? If we're going to keep talking about not paying staff, I want to know, what point are we there? Is it 10 years down the road? Because then it's not really an emergency. Is it 6 months from
So-
now? Then that might be an emergency,
I wanna
but I don't know what it is.
I want to clarify for our board and our community, we did not say we're not going to pay our staff.
No, of course not. But that's what.
You
our-
asked a question about, we will pay our staff. And I think President Margill mentioned how districts are doing that are threefold. We're looking at making sure we're being good fiscal stewards and making sure that we are looking long-term, as board principals mentioned. And we are beginning to make the decisions before we get to a state where you need to have a reduction in force, as many districts around us have done. We want to move away from that, but as far as paying our staff, we will pay our staff, whether it be through a loan or whatever it may be.
I think what Donald is asking, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I think what he's asking is, if we're in an emergency, are we at the point where the firefighters are coming to put out the fire? Are we dialing 911? Are we getting out the fire extinguisher? Like, where are we in this emergency situation? Because
So,
we've
I
said this
believe-
is an emergency.
I think that's
I'll
that's
turn it over to
correct,
Mr.
but-
Peregrine. I believe
but
he
my-
answered that. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to finish out my question, because none of what was said answered my question. And my question stands, if we're going to be talking about that, if we're going to be talking about this hypothetical situation where we aren't paying staff, how do we get there? Explain that process.
Well,
I want to hear what he has to say.
Okay. I would just wanted to clarify one thing, because I think it's clear it's next year.
So as shared earlier, we experienced that in December. So in December, we had an early release. We don't have enough cash.
Sorry, can I ask one question on that?
Sure.
And so, at that point, we had been contacted by the state, and we were required to start doing other means, because there are supports in place, right?
No, the state did not contact us. It is our responsibility to make it work. And to make it work, we have to juggle some of the things that we need to do. We have to delay some of the vendors' payment to allow for the payroll to go through, because like the superintendent says, we are not intending not to pay our employees. Our intention is to pay our employees on time, no matter what it takes to do that. And that happened in December, when we had to delay some of the vendors' check that typically were scheduled on that particular date. We had to delay that so that we could make way for the payroll. So it already happened. So you
I'm
asked,
sorry, but I don't mean to belabor the point, but your answer does not answer my question. The fact that we're able to move money around and get it taken care of means we don't have to do it.
well,
The
if you
point
would
that
allow
we
me
would
to
get
finish my sentence, I'll tell you when it could potentially happen next. Because if you look at that chart right there, you see in 24-25, we ended with 8.9%. I mentioned to you today, our balance is 45 million, which is more aligned to the 8.9%. You see what happened in 25-26 is 5.7. That number is 30 million. When we hit that 5.7%, at any given time, we will have 30 million in the bank, where the next month we have 47 million bill. So it could happen very soon, probably as early as February. So that means that in February, if we have the same situation, the same thing, we're going to do it all over again. We're going to try to move, and maybe in this case, we might need to execute a borrowing in February. Because that 5.7% does not give us enough for the next month. Now, think about this, if we were able to balance the budget in 26-27 at 5%. 5% gives us 28 million. Again, my bill remains at 47, and I got 28 million in the bank. So that would be starting on September 1st. So from now until August, we're going to be experiencing this challenge. And if we don't have enough money in the bank every month, this is what we're going to do. And we may need to execute borrowing from one fund to the other to be able to pay our bills. Again, as a priority, we will pay all our employees first before all the other vendors.
But then if we're, I'm sorry,
okay.
I'm having trouble with this because if we are always going to pay our staff, why are we talking about it?
Because we have
If
to
we're-
borrow money to do
Because we
this.
have to borrow money to
When
do
you
that.
have to take money from a
We
credit
borrow-
card to pay things,
This is not a household budget. If we are talking about real people here and we are saying that we are going to scare them by saying we might not be able to pay you, that is what I'm hearing.
No,
That is
no,
what everyone-
none of
and
us
I
have
know-
said
I
that.
know
None of us has said
five
that.
times over.
Okay, why are we talking about salaries then? If we are not worried about that at all, which it sounds like we are not,
We are worried about it. We will always make payroll because we will borrow the
then
money, which
why are we
costs us
using
money.
it- Why are we using this hypothetical situation that can't happen as a situation?
We just experienced
just
it in
happened in December.
No, we did not. Not anyone was not paid. When was the
Oh,
last time we did not pay someone?
wait. I'm sorry. Let me be clear. You're saying where we actually never pay employees. That's your scenario.
No, we don't pay one employee. That's where I would draw the line.
Okay, so I think it's semantics. I see now. I think it's semantics. Right now, in the payroll budget, we owe, at the end of this month, we will owe $47 million. I'm gonna round it out, $47 million. And currently, in that budget line item right now is $30 million.
There's 45.
45. So, I'm sorry, 47 and 45. So right now, in theory, if I did nothing, if we did nothing, we would not pay staff at the end of this month because we'd be short $2 million. What's happening is we are moving the money around. We're delaying payments to the water and transportation and whatever we're doing. We're moving the money around. And we are ensuring that we're paying 47 million. But at the end of every month right now, we are running a deficit because we don't get paid in time.
And,
That's what's happening.
and if we get to a place where you can't just, and I'm going to go back to household, because like, if you say, well, I can't make my rent this month, so I'm just not going to buy gas or food for my family, sure, you can move things around, but there's a point where that has to stop.
Right.
And that's what will happen in our district too. You can only move it around so much. The contracts that we have to pay our vendors, these things come up. So then we go to a point of having to borrow funds. When you have to borrow funds, then you have the interest payments on top of that. And when we go out to our community and ask to borrow money in a big way, because we have buildings that are really old. Take a moment to walk around our district and look at our buildings compared to a lot of our neighboring districts. Like, we've been doing a lot with less for a long time, and we have to build up some of these schools. And so when we do that, it's going to cost us even more because we haven't shown fiscal responsibility. And so that's what we're trying to get to, is that fiscal responsibility. So that's my ask is, over time, can you give us a plan of what that looks like on page 44, but adding in, building up that fund balance?
Well, and then eventually, let's say we don't treat this as an emergency, right? We don't heed what's going on here. Eventually, what will happen, because we're borrowing and asking and borrowing and unable to meet our interest payments and pay the bills, eventually, the state will put us into binding conditions.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in those binding conditions, what could happen, I'm not saying it would, but what could happen is we might have to shut down some schools. And
Yes.
we've said that is a priority that we don't want to see. We don't want to lay off staff. We don't want to shut down schools. We want to minimize the impact on our classrooms and on our students.
Yeah.
And so without doing something, we then have gone against our guiding principles here.
Yeah.
At no point have I suggested that we don't do anything. I don't know if I'm not getting that through. What I'm saying is we are using emotional, targets on people to make an argument about something that should be a rational decision based on finances.
Yeah.
And when you talk about people not getting paid, that's all they hear. It doesn't matter if you couch it in some other way. The only thing people hear is they were talking about not paying people. That is literally all they hear. That's the soundbite. So when you talk about this, do not talk about people's lives like they don't matter. This is how, because that is how they see it.
I think you need to be really clear here. You're the only one saying that people are not getting paid.
Okay.
We're all saying that
Can-
we're going to
can-
pay our employees.
Can we take a breath for a sec? Because it seems like folks are getting really emotional.
No, I know, but when somebody puts words in my mouth,
Of
I do
course.
take that personally.
But
Can we take a break? I would like us.
You may walk away at any time. We have 20 more minutes.
Yeah, I'd like to
Can we take a
ask.
vote on the
I-
minutes?
You don't vote on
As
it.
president of the board, we have 20 minutes because this is a special session. We will continue,
Yeah.
but as an adult, you are allowed to leave at any moment.
So President Margell, members of the board, when we started this work session, I asked the board to focus on the presentation and the assumptions in the details. I also asked the board to focus on understanding the gap that's presented based on the slides you see. I would ask the board to refocus on what you see. That's the purpose of these questions. What you see and what you still need to understand collectively. I use the word collectively. So, Board President, I ask you to continue your questions on the presentation that my team worked very hard on to share. And so we can leave with that understanding.
I believe Director Cook skipped over Director Williams, so I'll go back to Director Williams for your question.
Thank you.
Actually, wasn't it your turn next?
I thought you had yours question answered.
She's on her second
Yeah.
question.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought that you asked.
I believe it was Director Gregory.
Okay. My apologies.
I would like to ask a question about transportation. And in the calculation, and I could be wrong, that's why I'm clarifying, it doesn't feel like they use mileage in a, I'm going to call it an enhancement. They don't consider mileage in this calculation when I looked at the state and OSPI. I could be wrong, that's why I'm asking this clarifying question. Because our district is 73, almost 73 square miles, and other districts are like 60 or 25 or, 50. And square miles, this big number. So I'm noticing in transportation, it feels more blanketed, and they're not using, like they would for a cost of living adjustment. Are we adjusted for our mileage actually spent? Is that included?
Yeah, that's a great question, and to be very honest with you, I have not really dug into the actual calculation of that. As I mentioned in the presentation, that the state run that calculation, we provide them any data that they ask. And there's a
Right.
program called the STAR program that they use for transportation. By the time it gets to us, it's a number. And so there's hardly any influence that we could do other than providing the actual data that we experience in the district. And so to answer that question, I don't know how the mileage play out
Right.
in this case, but that actually strikes attention. I think I would like to look into it.
Yeah, when I looked at it, when I was trying to dig into it, I didn't see it quickly enough for myself, and I was like, is there like some hidden thing? But that's one of those things that I think about when I compare ourselves to other districts. I look at the square mileage because we're driving people all over.
Well, the one thing that I could share about transportation that I know is that they also look at the prior year expense. This is a little bit different than any others. And that if you were allocated a certain amount and you don't get to spend all of that, your funding goes down. And so it is really important for our transportation. That's why you see a slight deficit right there. They're trying to spend as much as they can so that the funding next year don't get slower. So that is one element. Now, there are many other elements in the calculation that I am not aware of, and definitely will dig into it and learn a little bit more.
I did sit in a session about transportation specifically at WASDA 2 years ago, when it was in Bellevue. And the other districts did talk about that in this calculation, like they had a mountain in the middle of their district and they had to like drive around the mountain to go pick
Yeah.
up the kids.
Yeah.
And that was not calculated in there. And so while we do have a large district, we luckily don't have a mountain in the middle of ours, right? And so, and we do have, paved roads that we can get to. Not all districts have that. So there are some things. I also do know that, I'd just like to point out the work that our district had done a couple years ago in looking at boundaries, and that we really spent a lot of time doing as much as we could to make it so our schools are walkable. And so more, now, I would also say, I think we are outside some of the norms of our neighboring districts and what each of the different school levels walk as a kind of traditional amount. So like where we might say you have to walk up to 1.75 miles or 1.25 miles, you might see 1 mile or 1.25 miles instead of the 1.75, so.
The other piece I wanted to add, it's important for our board to really understand this, because in Olympia, this is a specific story I shared with several representatives. So the first point is, I believe ridership has a lot to
Yes.
do with what we're talking about. So we'd have to come back to you, really share that. That's an important piece in addition to the mileage piece. The other piece is this. That's if we're talking about just our yellow buses.
Right.
That is not the only thing that school districts use to transport students.
Right.
We use for McKinney-Vento taxi service, private contracted services, by the way. That's a bill that we've been trying to push that we don't pass, because it actually taxes small companies that pass on that tax to us, because we simply have to pay that contract. So that's a side note, but I just want to make sure the board understood that it's not just our yellow buses, it's those unfunded mandates or our special, remember I said, take the needs of our students into account when you fund districts. Last thing I'll say is that transportation, you recall, last legislative session was one of the 3 buckets. It's special ed, MSOC, transportation. It'll continue to be so. Thank you.
Director Williams?
So I think Director Cook has made a really important point in that our biggest asset are the people that work in this district. And I've heard from multiple labor partners and multiple employees, they're scared, right? They're scared about cuts. They're scared about losing their jobs. And so when I look at our budget cuts, right, and totaling this up, it's 30 to 35 million on slides 47 and 48, right? Where are we emphasizing these cuts so that it has, number one, the least impact on our students, because that's what we're here for, that's what we're centering on. But also, when we think about the people that make up this district, because again, you've pointed out, that's 80% of our budget is people. That's an emphasis for us. How are we making sure that our cuts are impacting the people in this district as little as possible?
Talk about that.
Yeah, I think. Excuse me, and just to make sure that I get the question, I
Yeah.
was writing that down. It's mentioned that the people are the biggest assets, and we totally agree. Where are we making the least impact? Are we making the least impact on students?
Yeah,
Is
where
what
do
you
we
mentioned.
trim that has the least impact on
Yeah.
students?
Per your principles, right?
Yep.
Board policy principles. And then finally is, you mentioned people, right? What are we doing to minimize that impact? And Dr. Behringer, if you want to talk a little bit about the work that has been going on.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the question. As you stated, 82% of our entire budget is people. As I stated a little bit earlier, it has been a board goal, and we appreciate that goal and stand by that goal, that we want to pay and compensate our employees regardless of their labor group, as well as we possibly can in the top third. And we do that. And when we do that, as you can see, if you look back on slide 34, the underfunded piece was, $53 million a year. The 33.69 on the CIS, CLS, CAS up on top, and then the Part 2 piece. We pay our employees really well. The state is missing the boat by about 163 FTE.
Right.
And even if we took an average number, that's $53 million that we foot the bill out of our budget to pay above what the state pays. So if we're gonna make any headway towards getting our revenues and expenditures close to each other, unfortunately, we have to continue paying all of our members exactly what we agreed to pay them. We just have to pay less of them. And
Yeah.
that's the tough part. So to your question of like, how do you stay away from people? There's really no way to stay away from people. So we really, really bank on attrition. If we can do anything we possibly can to stay away from having to take jobs from people without people separating through retirements or leaving the state and things like that, that's really where, again, we kind of roll the dice and hope and pray. Every year that we have a certain amount of attrition that leads us in that direction. So the impact to those others are not impacted that way where we actually have to do some sort of non-renewal or, and Israel just kind of alluded to this. We've made it clear, we communicated with the board last week, we communicated with our teachers union, that we have no intention of coming to the board with a formal resolution around a reduction in program or a reduction in force. We are really putting all of our eggs in the attrition basket in all of our labor groups. And then also know that we have to make some reductions in some areas. And not all of our attrition perfectly works out in the exact areas that we need them. So we have to make some strategic and intentional reductions in those spaces, but as a last resort, not as we're just gonna jump in and cut all these jobs. It really is, it's a shell game. We're moving things around and make sure that we can make things work because we know that we have more employees than the state pays for. And we know that our revenues are below our expenditures. And no matter what we've done, the gap is still there and it's still growing. So we can cut as much as we can in MSOCs and programs and things like that don't impact people. Then you start getting into the integrity of how can you even function operationally in those spaces. And so now you're taking away the tools that all of our people that we care about need to use to be able to get our kids where we want them to achieve. So yeah, it's a challenge. But we want to make it clear that 35 million, moved to 30 million, hopefully it's going to continue to go down. Again, as students enroll, that changes things.
Right.
As numbers change, that changes our overall shortfall. And so it's important to recognize that every single month we're looking at the adjustments and going, and so like even today, if that's true with the categorical funding, and we truly are going to be 100% for the 26-27, well, there's 3.2 more million that are sitting on that 47 or 48 that'll come back. So it's a little bit less. Then you're looking at, okay, that's a little bit less. But also, it doesn't mean as a system that we should go, okay, well, we only need to cut $27.1 million because we have 9.5 next year. And whatever we can do this year within the mindset of like attrition and efficiencies and things like that, which we're constantly looking at, revenue enhancements, we should do that. So maybe we don't have to cut anything next year. Maybe we can have a break for a second, we cut last year, we've cut the last 4 years.
Right.
Now, not $30 million, but double-digit $1 million cut last year, and likewise the year before. And so, yeah, it'll impact people. We're definitely trying to stay away from schools, but unfortunately, a large majority of all of our employees are in schools.
Right.
And so that's the tough part about that. And again, if you've walked through the buildings over the last couple of years, we do have some classrooms that have some really small class sizes. And when the state staffs us at a certain amount, they're staffing at us like, you should have this many number of kids in your class. And if you're having a class size of 11, and the state's staffing at a certain amount, and we're paying on top of that, we're not being efficient or good stewards of the funds that we have. And so we have to make those tough decisions. That's where we're at. Hope that helps.
Thank you so much. I hope that that helps reassure some of our labor partners, or not. Unfortunately, that's the position we're in. But I think having the clarity and the transparency is really important right now in this kind of mode that we're in, where there's lots of rumors and lots of swirling talk. Being able to hear directly from you and Superintendent Vela that these are the priorities. This is where we're at. Thank you.
Yeah, and just a note, I sent the board last week an email before I sent to all staff stating what we just talked about.
My question is around vacancies. And we know that, and I'm sorry, this is old information. I might be remembering in today's numbers. I'm sure that they move because vacancy rate goes up and down probably close to daily, right? We had like 100 positions that were vacant. And yet in our budget, we're budgeting to pay all of those people. But we know like tomorrow we're not going to just hire 100 of them because we need quality people that want the job. We want them, like all of that, right? We know how hiring goes. So can you talk to me about why would we put that in our budget if we don't have the bodies?
Yeah. So typically, when we put the FTE in the budget, there are some rationale for it. You know, whether it be a class size or we're putting classroom teacher because the students are anticipated to come. When it comes to special education, there is an IEP associated with it. So we project a certain enrollment and we say this is the number of staff that we needed. This is the number of paraeducators that we needed. So there are a couple of things that could potentially change. After you adopt the budget with those FTE, there are a couple of things that might change that. We've experienced them in October, that the number of students showed up actually is 800 less than what we anticipated. At that point, we looked at what would it mean for us to, or is there an opportunity for us to reduce the expenditures? And unfortunately, there wasn't, because year already started and contract has already been issued to our staff. And so when we looked at it, we see that we are overstaffed by X number, but there is not much we could do because the year has already started and contract has been issued. So those FTE are in the budget. Now you mentioned about vacancies. When there is vacancy and when there are associated commitment for it, like for example IEP, we still have to hire an agency staff to be able to make sure that they are covered, because we have to comply with the IEP. While the budget is sitting in salaries and benefits, the expenditure are happening in the contracts. And so that's the area where at some point we need to move those dollars from salaries and benefits to contract. And that is true for our ESAs, that is true for our teachers, that is also true for our paraeducators. And so as long as there is an IEP, we first need to figure out how to be able to adhere to the plan, whether it be a hired employees or whether it be an agency staff. Now, in addition to that, we added additional FTE, approximately 31 FTE from the time you adopted all the way to October. And those additional FTE were not part of the adoption, but we still have to hire. And so while there are vacancies, there are also additional FTE that we have to cover. And so sometimes it actually washes each other out. And so that's the current nature of that. And while, you know, even at this time, when you look at our financials, when you look at, let's say, a particular category, you would see a big balance on it. It's just because, you know, some of them are probably vacant, but they could be hired at any moment. And so the budget has to stay in the system.
And even though that they could be hired at any moment, until they do get hired, which is kind of different than corporate world, right? We just will leave a vacancy and there's less expense and everybody else just has to do more, right? Or whatever. We have mandates, and so we're paying for it by bringing in substitutes or agency staff. And so the money is still being paid, but out of a different bucket.
Yes, and I'm glad you pointed it out, because then if, let's say, if it's a special ed class, if a teacher, if the IEP says there's a teacher and there's a para, and if we are not able to hire the para, we have to compensate the teacher extra. And so that's also part of that, that cost.
Sorry,
Okay.
can I ask one more question? I know we're at
It's
time.
at 6:59.
It's just because Dr. Behringer made a comment that I just was curious about. If we can.
As long as we can answer it in 1 minute.
Okay. I just want to make sure I understand everything here. So if we raise because we're talking about raising the fund balance requirement, if we were to do that, does that have any implications for the automatic things that change in contracts that would allow us to do things differently as far as staffing, as far as reducing staffing or whatnot? Would that give us additional ability to do so?
Good question. No. Contracts are all negotiated. So regardless if we or the board decides to change the fund balance to 6%, 7%, we are still obligated to follow the written agreement.
But if
So,
their written agreement says, because their written agreement says that if it's approved by the board, and if we approve a higher one, then we wouldn't be meeting that, correct? Like if we were at 6% and we were at 5.7 right now, because we're at 5.7, and we raised it to 6%, then that would put us out of compliance, correct?
Well, I'm
well,
sure that we would set the limit to where we have it
that'd be correct.
meet within the budget. Like, we would make a plan and make the wording on that one match.
But we have
If
to
something
vote-
changed, we'd have to sit back down with the association and go back through that. Maybe create an MOU until the interim, until we're able to do a full bargain.
And Wade, I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
you're good.
I'm so sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt. Mr. Parengao, thank you so much for your work. Lisa, I know that you also, and the entire team, please send that back. Thank you very much for that. We know that this is complicated and important and meaningful work, so thank you for giving us the information to do so. It is 7:01, and we are now adjourning this work session, and have a good evening. Thank